We encourage our audience to ask us questions. We have a Q&A box right here for you all to ask questions, and we'll address as many as we can at the end of our discussion today. Also encourage you to click on the chat button at the bottom of your screen at any time. Share your thoughts and comments. If you want to go ahead and try that now and tell us where you're calling from, that would be wonderful. My name is Kira Valentine, and I'm going to be moderating today. I'm CAL's Vice President for Policy and Development, and it is my great pleasure to introduce our two presenters for today, our two speakers. Dr. Gail Prasad is assistant professor in the Faculty of Education at York University. Her research investigates critical, creative, and collaborative approaches to teaching and learning in multilingual contexts, with a focus on developing critical multilingual language awareness for teachers and students. She's conducted collaborative classroom-based research with educators and multilingual learners in Canada, the United States, France, Kenya, and Burkina Faso. Her work has been published in English and in French in journals including the Canadian Modern Language Review, TESOL Quarterly, and Glottopol. She's also a co-editor of Multilingualism in Education, Researchers' Pathways and Perspectives, published by Cambridge University Press in 2022. I am also delighted to welcome Elba Garcia, who is a senior community advisor with Montgomery County Public Schools. Elba served for 10 years as the Executive Director for the Language Acquisition Division in the Office of Teaching and Learning in DC Public Schools. DCPS, go, I'm a DCPS parent. In that role, she oversaw the development and implementation of programs for multilingual learners, created a language access unit, and redesigned the Welcome Center for recently arrived multilingual students. She served as a bilingual teacher, program coordinator, program manager, and content director, as well as serving in multiple advisory groups for Title III, parent engagement, EL funding formula, professional development, and career mentoring. She completed a BA in special education from the George Washington University, a master's in curriculum development from George Mason, and most recently an executive master's in leadership from Georgetown University. She is the co-chair of the Association of Latino Administrators and Superintendents, that's ALAS, of the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. So thank you to both of those speakers for joining us today, and welcome. And I'm going to kick us off with a general question about leadership, and I'd love for you both to weigh in from your research and your experiences. So Gail, why don't I turn to you first. Can you say, from your research perspective, what are attributes of effective leadership for ensuring success for multilingual learners? And Gail, you're on mute.
I've been doing that all day. Here we go. Thanks so much for having me and for hosting this webinar. I'm thrilled to be here. And in terms of this question about effective leadership, I think we need to take a systems approach, or what I would say an all hands on deck. And so for me, that means it all hinges on the collaboration of families, teachers, administrators, and other students. So if we're looking at effective leadership from an administrator's perspective, it means, for me, making schools to be welcoming environments for families. And I use families in the broadest sense of the word. So not just thinking about parents, but grandparents, other caregivers that have expertise and lived experience that is so enriching for student learning and for teacher understanding of communities. And then for teachers, prioritizing time for collaboration amongst classroom teachers, ESL specialists, bilingual specialists, that this is something that can be planned in directly, and that when administrators take leadership for that and teachers seize those opportunities, that type of collaboration flourishes. And then leadership on the part of other students. And I think for me, this has been the key area that has often been neglected, that we focus on supporting the English language development of multilingual learners, which is essential, but haven't necessarily attended to the work that needs to be done with English dominant speakers to welcome these students into the schools and into the communities, and to help them develop their capacity as multilingual listeners and as allies. And so I think effective leadership needs to look across the system at every level, to be giving everybody the agency to be coming on board.
Alba, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Where have you seen great strategies? What kind of attributes come through when you see great leadership for multilingual learners?
Yes. And again, thank you for having me, and happy to be part of this conversation. When I think of what qualities a leader must have to ensure that multilingual learners have access to all of the great stuff that our schools are able to offer, I think of a couple of things. You must be self-aware and understand the impact that you have as a leader on others, not only the people that you're leading, meaning your direct staff, but the people that sit across the table from you, right? And you need to be able to leverage those opportunities every time you see them. You definitely must have empathy. You can't work with our population if you don't understand where they're coming from and the struggles that they face. I think you need to be an active listener and stay in tune to what's happening on the ground so that you can elevate the issues that are brewing in the community to the higher up, so that everybody's aware of what is happening within the communities that we serve. I think, and as Gail expressed, I think you need to inspire a shared vision, not only just with the people that you see every day, but in the teams that you are part of. And what I mean by that is, if your district is engaging in some strategic goal development, we need to be the voice that calls out if those strategies are the same or different for multilingual learners. Sometimes, we globalize when we don't go deep enough to understand that in our role, we're almost like storytellers, and multilingual learners are all different. They all have a different story. They may have come, yesterday in a bus, or they may have been second, third generation. So being aware that when we tell the stories, we are contributing to the elimination of that single story that folks may have on the immigrant experience. So using that, I would say, in order for you to be successful, you need to deliberately forge strong partnership with your state office. You must be able to turn challenges into opportunity and understand change cycle to the core, because I tell folks, I have served under 19 superintendents. You have to be able to understand the entire cycle of change, administration, reorganizations, changes in demographics, influx of students, and you need to be able to understand that so you can lead through it and take those challenges as opportunity. And lastly, I will say that you need to build a resilience team and empower them, because you're only one. You need a team that is going to be, populating all across your organization, so that you can get at that strategies. And you can't be everywhere. So you need a team that could speak the same voice and could be, influencing in multiple locations at times. Does that make sense?
I love that reminder of the danger of a single story, for us to understand the diversity of the multilingual learners across the United States. There are so many stories there. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think I get to have the next question. My name is Andrea Sturzik, and I'm a professor at a Canadian university, the University of Regina, and I'm also fortunate enough to serve on the Cal Board of Trustees. So the next question I have for the panelists is, what key insights do you have from your own experiences working in this area? Gail, maybe could you start us off again?
Oh, sure. Well, I think for me, one of the most recent learnings or emphasis for me has been on this idea of collaboration, and I would frame it as linguistic and cultural collaboration. And so I mean that by collaboration between teachers, between school and community, and between students. In a recent partnership that I was working on through the University of Wisconsin-Madison and the Madison District School Board, I was approached by a principal who recognized that there were 17 different languages in her school, and but was really only serving 2 linguistic populations, the Spanish speaking and the Arabic speaking. And she wondered, what else could we do to reach the entire community? And each of these students, as we said, they're, each of them come with their own stories. They each come with their own communicative repertoires. And we developed a program that became a whole school initiative that they describe as multilingual reach, where all students from kindergarten to grade 5 were engaged in multilingual learning activities for half an hour a week, across for every week for the whole school year. And they engaged in multilingual projects that allowed multilingual learners to showcase their cultural and linguistic expertise, and allowed English dominant speakers to grow in their understanding of multilingualism as an asset, as a resource in their community. And as this continued, we saw collaboration extend not just between students within the classroom as they engaged in shared projects, but also beyond, as parents began to recognize that their children's sensitivity to languages and awareness of issues was growing. And so we had our public libraries come on board. We had public sharing events. And Kira, I think you have the links maybe that you can pop in to showcase some of the students' work. But really, this all came about because of a teacher taking a school principal taking leadership, the parent council coming on board and seeing this was an initiative they wanted to support, and then teachers coming on board and adopting and buying into this approach of teaching through a multilingual lens, and then students working together. And as that happened, parents and families also became involved, and we saw across the district that the school had the highest percentage of family engagement, which is an incredible outcome of a multilingual collaboration, that people felt their sense of belonging within a community. So I think collaboration for me is the key to building relationships with community, to extending partnerships, to seeing relationships sustained over time that allows programs such as these to flourish.
That's a really nice example. Okay, so now I'll move to Elba. Same question. What key insights do you have from your own experiences in this area?
Yeah, and I'm gonna continue on the theme of collaboration, Gail, because I think too often directors of multilingual offices work in silos, and we just need to stop that. We are not gonna, unless we are investing our time into empowering other teams within the organization, we continue to work in a small office with a small lens, with a small reach. So I would say the only way we're going to advance multilingual learners is by ensuring that all of the offices that touch multilingual learners are equipped and have the ownership. And I'll give you an example. That means your PD office, your professional development office should know what the teachers need to be equipped, what kind of tools they need, all teachers to work with language learners. It can't be the ELL office is now going to come up with specific training just for them. So including the curriculum office, right? There's curriculum that we need to do that is specifically for newcomers or for live students. But for anything else, we should be using universal design, and our curriculum writers, our curriculum teams that are putting content out there should be using universal design, should know. And if they don't know, then you need to invest the time to do a side-by-side with them and teach them how to do it, because otherwise what you get is pushback from everybody, and the assumption that because you're the multilingual expert, you have to know about every little area. So not only curriculum, but data and assessment, after school activities. You also need to work with your community and your advocacy groups, because you have no idea how valuable assets they can be in supporting you from the outside,
Mhm.
right? When you're trying to get some sort of strategy from within, you can tap into those communities and advocacy groups to be raising it from the outside and create the synergy so that you can get your strategies where they need to be. And I would say a key insight is like you must use data to tell your story. You must be able to share and communicate constantly with leaders in your district of how quickly are your students reclassifying, how were they doing after they exit. That is the true power of your story. ELLs or language learners are going to exit programs. How well they do after tells you how well your program was. And we don't often track them. So if you're not using this data to follow the students and, you know, how do they go to college? What do they do after? Start looking for ways to getting that data. And then also be aware that sometimes the absence of data tells me that for your district, these students are invisible. So you need to be the one always putting up the data front, asking the data, and frame it in a way that allows other people to understand it and continue to push that, you know, these are different kids. We got kids coming in kindergarten, exiting in third grade. We have kids accelerating in dual language by the time, you know, like use your data to tell your stories and continue supporting the programs that you feel are working in your districts.
I want to applaud that, because my next question is going to be, what are the key policy recommendations? And I am going to repeat, Elba, what you just said about tracking the data of the students that are reclassified out of programs, because that is the true story of how well you did. I mean, that just, it's so simple, but it's so powerful. You know, Elba, what taking that as sort of number one, what other key policy recommendations or takeaways would you like folks to think about for that leadership that works really well for students?
Yeah, I would say, you know, use all of the flexibilities that the state gives you, right? If your state, and understand that sometimes your state office may not have expertise in language learners or working with multilingual learners, right? So advocate for all of those flexibilities so that you can enhance the program. And what I mean by that is, if your state offers you 4 years after reclassification and they're going to be able to track that, use it. Don't stop at 2 just because you're comfortable. Use the 4 years, get the data. If your state offers you opportunities to offer credit-bearing classes outside of the school day, meaning in a night program or in a summer program to accelerate to shorten the years of graduation, use that. Write that waiver. It might be hard to write, but get it, because that means that at the student level, you're going to shorten their time they're going to be in school. So invest the time. If your state is tracking a 5-year graduation, use it to the maximum. Start saying and start explaining to them that sometimes that 5-year graduation is really sticking the kids still in a 4-year track. Because if you arrive in February, you have 4 years, but really what you have is 3.5.
Mhm.
Because that first year that you started in February is still your 9th grade.
Starts your clock. Yeah.
That's your clock. So take the 5-year graduation, use all those flexibility. And again, if you don't feel your state is savvy enough about the issues, partner with them. Get yourself involved in work groups, get yourself involved in advisory committees, attend any cross office thing about how funding is created. Just, you have to get the whole picture so that you can figure out where are those points of entry that you can leverage your flexibilities in the policy recommendations. Now, every state, if your state is not savvy enough, you may be the one pushing the agenda to say, hey, I notice how some states are reclassifying at this. Did you consider, can we compare ourselves to another state that has about the same, maybe your kids are staying too long in ELL and it's because your exit criteria, you have to be the voice if your state office isn't savvy enough to make decisions for your state. Does that make sense?
It sure does. Thank you
Okay.
so much, Alba. Gail, I'd like to ask you to weigh in from your perspective and from your research. What key policy recommendations might you make?
Well, sure. And I just want to really echo what Alba has said here in terms of flexibility. I think that what I have heard from teachers, one of a really powerful interview that I had done with one of the teachers engaged in multilingual project-based learning with me, was just the recognition that curriculum and the curriculum is a policy document too. And that the work of teaching is interpreting and finding the openings in the curriculum and leveraging them to engage in multilingual pedagogy. And so I think that learning how to read policy through a multilingual lens allows us to be creative in the classroom in our practice, but also in our advocacy. And for me, the essentials are, marrying criticality with creativity, and we do that through collaboration. So I think that if we look at policy broadly writ, we can see that there are policies that teachers enact on a daily basis, and really trying to adopt an open policy context where students can come into the classroom and being allowed to use their non-instructional languages for academic purposes, to show what they know, to foreground their expertise. I think we also need to be working on what do provisions for multilingual assessment look like, so that students can be assessed in ways that are ethical and equitable. I think
And
the
accurate.
other thing would also be, advocating for time for structuring for co-planning and co-teaching. I think there's a misunderstanding that co-teaching and co-planning means that it's half the work, when in fact, I'll be honest and say it takes more time to co-plan and co-teach, because we're doing something, we're having two people engaged in really important work that makes content accessible, that ensures the success of our students. And so it is a resource essential investment.
Thank you. Thank you so much to both of you. I'm going to take a few minutes now towards the end of our call to just engage a little bit with our audience. And I've been watching in the chat, and we have folks from not only all over the United States, but all over the world. We have folks joining us from Finland, from Nigeria, from Mexico City, from all across the US. So welcome to everybody. And the first question that I want to share is specific actually to Madison, Gail. This is an audience member who is from Madison, who writes, I wonder if you observed any effort to include the integration of Native American languages. In the case of Madison, the indigenous language is Ho-Chunk. And the state of Wisconsin has legislation that's mandated that pre-K through 16 students need to be involved in Native American instruction. I'm not sure if that's language instruction or not, but could you speak to, as you see that leadership across all of the languages that students bring into schooling, what do you see that's specific, different, special about the indigenous languages of the Americas?
Sure, I think that's a wonderful question. When you begin to take a multilingual stance towards instruction, we began in Madison with an ecological perspective, saying, what are the languages that are represented here, both by the students who live here currently in these classrooms, but also for the people and the languages that have dwelt here and have been caretaken in this land for generations. And so we certainly were conscious of the indigenous languages that were represented, Ho-Chunk in Madison, and we had teachers who were involved in bringing in community resources to try and incorporate them into the multilingual projects that we were engaged in. So I I'm not sure if any of the examples that I've shared have examples of those books, but the Madison Historical Museum also became involved in one of our 4th grade and 5th grade projects where we were documenting, students were writing in their social studies curriculum about Wisconsin history and incorporating Indigenous languages also played a part in that work, and students published, instead of books, they published bilingual brochures in order to make that history more accessible. In the work that we were doing with dual language schools, we had parents who spoke Indigenous languages from Mexico, and they came in and read stories in these languages and also were able to translate the books that we had done. One of them was based on science content and animal habitats, and another one was in grade 1. I think it was based on a book study of Rosie's Walk. And so we've made efforts to try and incorporate Indigenous languages into the work that we're doing. I think one of the challenges we see is honoring the time and expertise of elders who are lending us that insight into the languages, and recognizing that these resources need to be invested in language revitalization within the communities themselves as well. And so creating a reciprocal exchange has been one that we've really been challenged with, and I continue that work here in Canada now, in looking at how we continue that work of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples in Canada.
Alba, we have just a minute or so left. I wonder, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share on that question, or any final wrap-up thoughts you'd like to share with us?
Not on that particular question. I'll leave it to Gail because she's definitely the expert. I believe she's written about some of this. So, right, make sure you check on the chat. No, but in general, I think I want to thank Cal for taking a stand and continuing to have open dialogue about important conversations about how do we kind of like create the synergy around and bring in experts that could help new folks coming into the practitioners and leaders and leading offices. And as our communities continue to evolve and grow, and we're seeing multilingual learners in more and more places, that they have a place where they can go, Center for Applied Linguistics, and also a cadre of expertise that they can tap into. And I'll be more than happy to share my information on the chat in case anybody wants to email me. For one-on-one, for advice, for mentoring, for whatever. So, but I do want to thank you.
Alba. Thank you. Well, thank you very much to both our speakers. I also want to give a huge thank you to our technical team at Cal today, who wandered through some challenges to get us to where we are. So I'm going to give a shout out to Hisham Al-Khazraki, Alfiero, and Sabrina Parker, and thank them so very much for their support today. They worked through some challenges and they got us here with, I think, some nail-biting finishes. I'm also going to drop in the chat a link to a survey. We'd love to hear your thoughts on how we did today. And we encourage you to share what you've learned today with your colleagues. We'll be sending out a recording of this webinar to you via email, and we'll also send some of those additional resources that were shared in the chat. So thank you very much for participating today. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to Andrea, and we'll see you all next time. Goodbye.